Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first study session for AI Associate. You should be able to see my screen. If you can't see my screen, let me know. And in a little while, we are going to be trading off presenters, but we'll get started. For today's session, we're starting to go into the application, and what we're going to cover is two things. We're going to be looking at, just as an overview, what the certification is about, but then we're going to be talking about AI fundamentals and AI capabilities. We've moved to ethical considerations to day 2 because we thought it would be better to do it all at once on that day. I also wanted to make sure everybody knows, right, we're a study group. This is not an official training session. I am not the people presenting are not certified trainers, and we're just sharing what we learned over the past few days. If you hear something that doesn't make sense, or if you know something different, ask questions, challenges, because we want to make sure we're understanding the content well, and we'll learn together. So if you have any questions, feel free to come off mute and let us know what your questions are, or you can put them on chat. Sound good? Awesome. So let's start by looking at what the certification is about. Our goal is deep learning, but if you cover the deep learning, the certification will come pretty easy. And so what this is, right, we want you to understand what are the AI features. And while this is a Salesforce study group, this goes well beyond Salesforce, right? This AI applies to a whole bunch of different things out there. Almost everywhere you see, you're seeing AI pop up in different places. The Zoom application that just updated for me today now has AI features. You're going to see later today that I generated a lot of the quiz questions using AI, and you're going to tell me if that was good or bad. But it's really good to understand what you're looking at. You know, what is predictive analytics? What is LLM? You know, those terms. Why does natural language processing matter, and how can you use it for you to help you on everyday works? We are going to look at Salesforce Trusted AI Principles just to see how they're handling AI and why you might want to look at a Salesforce feature versus something else. And also looking at understanding how you want to talk about this. And what I thought was really great about this certification is it's meant to make you understand the basics and have intelligent conversations about AI. This is not a deep. Hi, Surisha. Can you mute for me? Welcome. Thank you so much. And this is about having intelligent conversations with other people. This week I was at a workshop with my company, and it was really great to be able to have these discussions with them and talk about what does that mean? How can we make it better? And how fast it's changing and improving. The exam itself is shorter than most. It's 40 questions. You get 70 minutes to complete it. I've heard from other people that take it, that it takes about 20 to 30 minutes to take it, but you may need longer, right? So no worries if that's the case. The first attempt is free. If you do not pass in the first attempt, there's a retake fee of $50. You don't need to know anything about Salesforce to take the certification. No admin or any other certification is required. So let's look at the areas that we want to look at. For the certification, today we're focusing on 25% of the exam, which is AI fundamentals and AI capabilities in CRM. For the most part, the capabilities in CRM are really part of the specialist certification. So when we do that study group, we'll dive more into that. This is meant to be overview, high-level review of what Salesforce is able to offer now. And then, like I said, next week we'll cover ethical considerations and data for AI. Depending on how much time it takes us, we may have a third study group just to cover it all, just so we make sure we understand what it's all about. Sound good? Awesome. All right, so let's look at AI fundamentals. And so, Elisa, do you have presentation rights, or do you want me to move the slides as you talk about them?
You can move them as
Okay.
I talk about them. Thank you.
All right, so let me know when.
All right, so when we think about AI, right, this is really machine learning. We are giving large amounts of data to basically a model that's been trained to make predictions. And we're going to focus on two types of AI, predictive and generative, right? This is what we're mostly seeing on our phones, on our Netflix, just all around us. And so to talk a little bit about each, we'll go on to the next slide. With predictive AI, these are some of the basic functions, right? How likely is something to happen? And this could be just numeric predictions, how to identify something, right? Is this spam? Is this a fish? Is this, right? Just identifying what's what. We have robotic navigation, and something that we've all started using for personal and professional life, language processing, right? How to either respond to an email quickly, how to better phrase something. So these are just based on predictive AI. Does anyone want to chime in to give examples of how they've used predictive AI just on the regular?
Well, this is Mark Russo at my company, Embraer. We're looking to roll out lead scoring. We're just early stages of dipping our toe in the water with AI and adding the lead score component and turning on lead scoring. We kind of believe it's like the it's a good way to just start dip our toe in the water and show stakeholders and salespeople, what the beginning of what we could do with AI. Um,
Yeah,
so
that's an excellent example. Anyone else?
Has anybody ridden one of the driverless cars, the Waymo? Yeah, it's actually a lot of fun. I got to do it last year, and a friend of mine and I, we took it together. And the first two rides we were on, we were recording it because it's weird to be in the back seat and have it no driver, right? And I sent it to my husband. He freaked out a little bit, but it was okay. We're in San Francisco, and in San Francisco, they drive like a grandma, which I thought was really interesting. They drive really slow, very carefully. And then I took it again in Scottsdale not too long ago, and the Scottsdale Waymos, very different how they do it. They're very aggressive. They cut people off. They drive much faster. I'm like, oh. And it was a little bit more nerve-wracking because you have no control, and there's basically a teenage driver driving you around now. So that was kind of interesting.
And they don't let you sit in the passenger seat, right? You have to sit in the back. Like you
You
can't.
can, correct, you can't sit in the driver's seat, but you can
Right.
sit in the front seat,
Oh, you
which
can.
you can. If there's three of you, you can sit in the front seat, but they will not let you go on the driver's side. Yeah.
Because I had coworkers who were just like, oh, I wanted to grab the wheel. Just,
Yeah. So like one of my friends that in Scottsdale, she goes, it cut somebody off and we thought we're gonna get hit, like T-boned. And so she said she will not write it again. So, it's just experiences to give them the feedback and things happen. But AI is always learning.
yeah. And I see Rocio mentioning ChatGPT, which actually uses predictive and, as we're going to see, generative, um, with varying levels of success, right? If anybody's tried to generate images. And I didn't mention this in the beginning, but big kudos to Marlene for putting these slides together. She, she's the brain behind this, and I'm just sort of helping her catch a break with the talking today. Um, and please give me a break in talking if you have other examples or anything that comes to mind as well. With generative AI, so on the next slide, um, we see what's really like the production of something new, right? So you are getting an output that is uh, a little bit more than what you would get with predictive, right? So you're either getting um, just a whole new summary, a translation, correction, and what we started seeing, right, is image generation, where you can say, princess by a castle looking at butterflies, and that can generate an image. In ChatGPT, I've had very limited success with image generation because faces will sort of be distorted, right? It's trying to create people, but the eyes may not be leveled and it comes out looking kind of weird. Um,
Are you using the paid version or the free version?
the paid version.
Oh, interesting. I haven't played with this. So I was curious. Okay.
Yeah. Any folks want to share examples of generative AI that they've used? I'm also using Copilot, like the paid version of Microsoft Copilot, and that's been pretty neat because we've been coming up with several protocols lately. So I'll just say, give me a protocol for sharing social security numbers, externally. And it'll generate a document off of those two sentences. It'll generate a document with formatting and sections and some language that I end up keeping, right? But I'll usually plug in my own, but it saves me time in not having to think about just the general format of such a protocol. So that's another example of generative AI.
And you mentioned imaging. I instead of ChatGPT, I've been using Gemini, the Google version,
Yeah.
because for whatever reason, and I think it's because of, again, it's connected to the internet. The imagings come a little bit more real. They do lack, in my case, I think that they tend to look all of them the same, which tells you that we're not there yet. But I also know that there's a whole bunch of other tools that people are promoting for more or better quality of AI imaging. So again, it's about exploring it and testing it out, what works for you.
I'm in the middle of a implementation with Zoom phones, and they have a feature that scores and gives feedback on phone calls for our customer service team. So they have a tool that will score each call up to 100 points and will look at the tone and determine if it was a good call or a bad call, or if the customer was upset. And then, of course, doing summaries like some of the other AI tools of the call.
So that means I won't have to take a survey after my call.
Hope so.
AI will just, I don't have to hang on after calls,
Is it,
support calls.
and Devin, is it transcribing the call as well? And you
Mhm.
keep that record? Oh yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, the speech to text, yeah. Okay. So yeah, cool.
So it seems like we're pretty comfortable with, knowing generative AI versus predictive. Let's review some of the differences on the next slide. So they have different objectives and functions. Let's take a moment here because I don't want to read to you all, and maybe just highlight that generative AI requires a lot more, right? So this is a lot more complex. You are actually producing something new, and it has that creative element, right? That I've used generative AI to create songs. Like I can say, I'm meeting with a Salesforce group on a Saturday in February, make a hip hop song, and it'll create a whole hip hop song, or I could do R&B, or I could do any sort of genre. And so this is definitely on the more creative side, which means that the algorithms are going to be a lot more complex. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the underlying magic of both of these AI and specifically generative AI in a couple of slides. Any other differences that folks want to highlight?
Well,
I
it really
definitely want to
depends
call
on.
out, sorry, I just want to call out really quick for this one. I have heard that the certification focuses on this. So you'll get scenarios of what is this versus that. So you want to make sure you understand this really well. And sorry, I think I cut somebody off. Who was it?
I was just going to make a comment that in the industry that I'm currently working at, there is a AI that is used to identify dental lesions of different levels, right? From a potential mineralization issue on the enamel to a more advanced caries, and that is proprietary, of course, because there's a ton of technology. I think they are on version 3 of their AI, and it has have needed to go through FDA approval because now it's even being used for diagnostic purposes for children. So
Wow.
it's kind of cool to see a real world application of a tool and how it has advanced in the last couple of years.
That's great, Gil. Thank you for sharing. That's awesome.
Yeah, and so this is the nitty gritty. On the next slide, we also summarize like thinking about your own solutions. Is it going to be a generative AI solution or something that's more predictive, right? Are you coming in with Are you giving this model already data that it can make predictions on, or are you generating something completely new? And speaking of what you're giving it, the exam also talks about different types of data. So on the next slide, I think Marlene did a really great job of bringing in a couple of different concepts, because you can either provide structured data, right? Thinking like an Excel spreadsheet, where you have a label and you have data and it's very clear what's what. And this type of data is ideal, right, for a model because it's supervised training. Like it's very easy for processing. But the reality is that us humans, we are more about unstructured data, and it's hard, as we know, to train our users to give specific instructions in specific ways. You know, we're just used to talking things out, and that's the unstructured type of data. And this is a lot more complex because in that model, you wouldn't be supervising that training. It's just kind of has to go off on its own. And I'm seeing some activity in the chat. Yep, other examples. That's really great. Anyone want to chime in here about structured, unstructured data that they've seen in solutions? So the importance of unstructured data, right, is that this is how we talk, right? This is just naturally how humans communicate. And this takes us into thinking about natural language processing, right? Which is what's really allowed AI to take off in the popular realm. And it's the use of unstructured data. The importance of us being able to tell Gemini or ChatGPT or even, Salesforce, like, hey, create a flow that can do this, this, and the other. There's two parts to that. There's being able to understand what you're saying, and then also being able to communicate back to you, right? Whether it's summarizing it or responding in a way that feels very natural, like you're talking to a human. And it's unfortunately what's allowed a lot of these, avatar AI solutions to make you feel like you're talking to Brad Pitt or, Cersei from Game of Thrones. And that's allowing people to have relationships with AI because of this natural language ability.
And I hadn't really thought about it because I had some challenges with my ChatGPT prompts yesterday. The way that you provide the information, right, it's technically unstructured because it's speech patterns. But sometimes I will give my prompts a lot like I had done the structure before, like the name, the cost. So I'll do audience colon, I'll say who it is, tone colon, and those kind of things. So I'm giving the information in a mixed format, but it's probably all going in as unstructured when it comes to ChatGPT. So I think I need to think about how I'm building those prompts just to make sure that I'm the way, because I've read that the response you get back from when you're generating content tries to mimic the way that you give it the information, right? So I wonder if I can refine some of my prompts that way. Kind of interesting to think about it.
It is, especially because I was thinking that although it is natural language, but it also using whatever structured data the model was provided to respond. So yes, I hear what you're saying about this, the mimicking you as the requester of information, but still in the back end, there's a ton of data that is being used that is structured because it's millions of other people's responses.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Thank you.
And a little bit on the history of this, right? Like machine learning is a lot older than, ChatGPT, right? We're talking about the 1950s, where this really started, but obviously it took off with the World Wide Web and us now having so much content that we could give these models. So it's a lot of folks are just thinking of this kind of like electric cars, like, oh, electric cars. And you think, no, it's been around for a long time, but it's definitely the technology that we have now that's been able to exponentially, take that into exponential growth. And Luciano, we appreciate all the examples that you're sharing in the chat. So let's talk about sort of what makes this work, like the magic, so to speak. We know it's not magic. It's a lot of mathematicians hard at work and being able to make this happen. So I think one of the interesting things is that when we think about AI, we think about it as a mirror sort of ourselves, like we're replicating a brain. And that translates even in the way that the terminology is set up. So the way that these models work is through neural networks. And please, anybody chime in who has more expertise, because I'm still in the early stages of digesting this myself. But basically, when you are giving data, right, you have several variables for it to consider, right? And sort of a possible outcome, right? This is a what we call a node, right? One very simple like sort of situation or scenario. And as we get more complex, so if you hit click on the slide, right? If we take all the different variables and give them different weights, right? Then you have more scenarios and it gets complicated pretty quickly. But at the end of the day, right, what we have is a need on one side, right, which is the input, and then a solution on the outside, on the rightmost side, which is the output. And in the middle, right, we are considering all of the possible scenarios, giving it weight, and within this, we're considering a term called bias, right? So the numbers that we see in the middle, those are sort of the bias. And this is bias in a positive way, right? Where we know that not every variable is equal, and we want to give some more weight and to give the most optimal solution on the right side of output, right? So this is, in a very simplified way, how machine learning happens. And the more complex or the more layers you add to this of like possible scenarios or nodes, the more you're able to achieve. And as you have more layers, then we get into what's called like deep learning, to the point where you don't even know exactly why the output is what it is, but it just sort of worked. And in the training, we'll come across terms like black box, right? This is just sort of that gut feeling now of the neural network that is giving you the optimal solution or the optimal output. So this is, yeah, just really trying to mimic sort of how our brain works, because you don't always have a chance to know why you made that decision, but it's sort of connected in your brain in all these ways that made it the right decision. And this is what generative AI largely depends on. Predictive AI doesn't always need deep learning. Sometimes it can just rely on that more simplified version. But generative AI has come about because we've been able to do all the math to have all those complicated scenarios and all those additional layers. Marlene, did I do an okay job there?
You're doing amazing.
All right, so I'll hand it off to you to talk about an example of a deep
Sure.
learning
And
model.
yep. And so what they'll do sometimes is they'll set one against the other. So this is called a generative adversarial network. And so what they're doing is there's a generator that tries to create those images, like you're saying, those faces and those kind of things. And there's a discriminator that tries to say, is this real or is it fake? And it's funny, I'm looking at the slides and seeing typos. But anyway, it's real or fake, not face. And then it gives that feedback to the generator that takes that information and continues to do this. You can imagine this happening thousands upon thousands of times, right? You can keep this going to make that model better and better. And this is how it learns and this is how it grows. So sometimes when you're generating your own, and even in ChatGPT, right, when you get the information, it will ask you which version do you like, this one or that one, or it'll ask you if it's good or bad feedback. And it's really using that information to learn and grow. Yesterday was interesting because I gave it instructions to generate 20 questions for the quiz. And it did something that I hadn't seen it do before. It gave me one example of each type of question that I wanted, and it verified that it had the right format before it generated all of the questions, which I hadn't seen it do that before. I didn't tell it to give me sample questions first, but it came up with the idea on its own. I'm sure it was somewhere in the template that I gave it, but it's the information that I gave it and it's giving it back to me. But this is really interesting. I think this is also very important for images, but also for the models that we're building just to make sure that, Devin, like you mentioned, is the call good or bad? It's going to be looking at the quality, looking at the text transcription and summarizing it and saying, yeah, that's a good summary or a bad summary. But no GANs and how they work because you are going to have that kind of information when you're looking at the certification. So that's what we have for the fundamentals. Is there anything that anybody wants to add that maybe you did your own reading that you want to add on how you are looking at the information for AI? No? All right, let's go on to the next section. The next section is only 8% for the certification. It's AI in CRM. And like I said, we're going to look at it from a very high level. And hopefully you'll join us for the specialist certification where we're actually going to do deep dives into how all this stuff functions and learn more about it. I was talking with another friend earlier today, and we both agreed that waiting to learn AI is probably going to be a challenge because there's so much to cover that if you just keep learning along the ways, you can layer it on versus doing a big, massive catch up later on. So let's look at some of the things that Salesforce is providing to make Salesforce better for contact centers. They've introduced some things, and what I noticed about this is there are some terms I hadn't seen before. So they've got Einstein bots. You've probably seen those for years, right? They have gotten much better. They used to be human-built, dialogue-driven, and very limited and very time intensive. Now, the Einstein bots will go through your past chats, past cases, and generate its own content. You get to approve it and review it, but it's pretty cool. You can also give it data sources to go through and say, here's my knowledge base, come up with the responses for it. Right now, I'm about to launch a pilot that's going to do very much that. We gave it all of our public articles, all of our customer-facing knowledge, and we've been doing some tests on some different vendors to say, how do you answer this question? How do you answer that question? It's pretty interesting to see what they come up with. We have Einstein Agent, which has also evolved. Now they're using AI to route the cases, doing triage, but also they're looking to see if they can do the case field prediction to say what's the best time to provide for arrival times and those kind of things. In the past, these were rule-driven features, but now they're model-driven features, right? Like Elisa said, it's far more complex. Now there's not a set of 10 rules onto how I route a case. Now it's looking at the neural network to say, this is how I've routed the past 5,000 cases. Go figure out the best agent to give it to. They've also, this was a new term for me, Einstein Discovery. And so I think this is, they used to have some of the like lead scoring and some of the other features, and they've taken it to be the more model driven that's predictive KPIs. So it's going to look to see how likely is it that you're going to be able to close the lead, the opportunity, the sale, but also making recommendations based on the information that you have or explaining the content. But Einstein Discovery for me is a new term, and it's one of the great features that Salesforce has added. I think one of you guys mentioned, Gil, you mentioned using photos to identify or diagnose potential diseases. Einstein Vision for field service also lets on-site people take a photo of maybe a part and they can say, oh, that's model XYZ, or they can say that's not the right image, go to something else, but it's looking at the images to figure out what can I do with it. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And of course, Einstein language, they're using a lot to do sentiment analysis. They're doing things to classify cases. So right now, when I have my own Salesforce org, I have a list of like 200 reasons that a case might be. Guess what? The agent picks usually one of the top 5, usually the first one. But now we're going to be looking and saying, can we use a model to actually classify it properly? What is the customer talking about? Are they talking about 3 different things, not one? That's pretty interesting. Almost all of these features are add-ons to Salesforce, but don't worry about that for the certification. Just know what Salesforce is capable of doing. But it's deeply embedding both predictive AI and generative AI. And so it's just one of those things that you can do quite a few things with it. Any questions or examples of how you guys have been using these?
I had a question, and I don't mean to go off tangent here, but how much of this has been rebranded to Agentforce, or is Agentforce some completely separate from what you're showing on this slide?
It's a really good question, and I would say it's a blend. So Agentforce is the marketing umbrella that Salesforce has for what they say about all of their AI features. There's a lot of confusion because a lot of these features were already around, like Einstein bots. What they have now is, and I can tell you from my personal experience with working with them for a contract, they have Einstein for service and they have Einstein for sales. And depending on what SKU you buy, that gives you some of these features, right? But that's separate from what we think of Agentforce, because Agentforce is that dialogue version of creating flows, answering questions, and doing more things. And some of these things are, from a Salesforce perspective, they're priced by seat. So if you have 100 agents, you're going to get 100 Einstein for service licenses. And it comes with limits, of course, but it comes with all of the features it comes with. Agentforce is more conversational and working with your customers. But also when you build the prompts and you say you are a service agent and you're helping a customer find the best, activity while they're on site, that's also Agentforce. So it's kind of blended, Mark. And Agentforce is what used to be Einstein Copilot. And so that's one of the things about getting into Salesforce, figuring out which layer of Salesforce am I talking about? Because it's all kind of, from a marketing standpoint, combined, but it is separate products and SKUs. That
And
help?
and I love that you mentioned that it's always driven by whatever cloud you're using, because when you're in sales and you're using Sales Cloud, that's one thing. If you're in service or field service, it's a little bit different. Because the example you were mentioning about the parts, we had a very older version that you could take a picture and it would help identify different versions of the same part, because sometimes that's also even critical because there's some equipment that might not work with the earlier or newer part. And I also know that Granger uses a lot of that to identify parts. Like when you go into a Granger and you don't know exactly what part it is, they take a picture, because I think they have that enabled into their Salesforce. So pretty cool
Awesome.
use
Thank
of
you.
those tools that sound rudimentary, and at the beginning they were, but I think that with everything that's happening, everything's getting more advanced, and the machine learning behind it, and the generative and predictive combination of the data is what's giving those faster results, more easy to use, and better for the end user.
Awesome. Thank you. Anybody else have any questions or comments? Great. Thank you. And so again, for the exam, it's 8%, but be aware of what Salesforce is capable of doing and what it's not capable of doing. So let's look at bots, because bots have been around for a while. And so the benefits of bots, right? You want to be able to deflect common issues. You want to be able to do self-service whenever possible. But you also want to be able to combine them with a human agent, because maybe you can reduce the amount of time that a human is speaking with the customer. You can get critical information from the customer ahead of time, or you can answer part of the issue and then hand it off to the agent and give them the summary that they need to continue their job. Because right now, again, I'm doing confidential AI bot right now, and we can have a customer that's talking to Hertz and saying, well, I want to extend my reservation, but I don't know where to go, or here's these policies. And maybe they've had a 5-minute conversation with the bot. When it goes to the agent, we're going to give them a summary. Here's the things that we've talked about. You don't have to go through the whole script. You don't have to scan through everything, and that kicks them off. And so it's a good way to look at bots. It's not just human, it's not just AI. You can combine them. And of course, the bots are understanding human language, which is pretty cool. You want to make sure that you're looking at, when you're designing a bot, it's not one and done. You want to be transparent. You want to be able to say that the customer knows they're talking to the bot. I think nowadays, as a customer, I kind of expect that I'm talking to a bot when I call a call center and they say, "Tell me what you're calling about." I'm like, I'm probably talking to a bot. When I go online, I usually know that I'm starting with a bot, which is really nice. They're starting to have some laws where you're required to say if it's a bot or not. I think Europe is a little bit ahead than the US about that. But again, it's a best practice and it makes sense. You want to make it personable to your brand. You want to make sure that if your brand is really formal, that you're using a formal way to address and responded. And if you're really relaxed, then you're doing the same thing. You want to make sure you're providing complete information. If you're just providing half of the answer and confusing the customer, it doesn't help. And you want to make sure you're continually planning to grow the spot. The features of AI are changing, but your information is also changing for your company. I've used the bot on Salesforce. Um, Instead of going through miles of help documents, I'll ask it, how do I do A, B, and C? And then their agent force, right, their AI bot is coming back and giving me the instructions in a better format than the help documents do. And sometimes I'll go, well, I don't know what number 5 means. Please expand on it. And they'll teach me. It also gives me bad information sometimes, so I'll verify it. But anyway, you want to make sure you're iterating because when you're building a bot, and bots are very common in our using of Salesforce. So just know that whether you're using Salesforce or not, you're going to be, if you haven't already, you're probably going to implement a bot soon. So that's the content for today. And don't worry, we have some more to go through. I'm going to be posting the slides on the meeting page. I'm going to upload the video to YouTube. That will probably be later today or tomorrow because it takes a little bit of time to process. And we're going to move on to do our quiz. Our quiz is meant to be fun, and there's going to be some mild competition. It's got a lot of questions. It's got something like, I want to say 40 questions. We're not going to go through all of them today, but I'm also going to post this quiz for you to take on your own later. It's good to go through it, and it will help you study when you're ready to take your certification. Just go through the questions. We'll have a quiz after each session, and then we'll go through it. Before we move on to that, is there anything else that you guys wanted to cover, either about fundamentals for AI or CRM features in Salesforce? All right, I'm going to stop recording so the quiz does not have to be recorded.